Our trade card collection is very special. Trade cards originated in Europe as a way to advertise businesses in the 17th and 18th century. At that time, a lot of streets didn't have addresses, so businesses would hang a sign out front advertising what they did. As a way of promoting their businesses, they started printing cards with the sign information on them. You might be interested in our trade card collection if you're interested in Topeka history, history of businesses, history of printing and graphic design, history of household objects, how certain ethnic groups were perceived. This particular card here, the Hudson and Root, is a good example of letterpress printing. And so they have different kinds of fonts, different type sizes to advertise what they can do. This one has engravings. This one here, the Topeka Lithographing Company, they're advertising everything they can do. If you need some printing done and you want something that looks like this, then this is a company you would want to go to for that. These trade cards are all examples from Topeka businesses, and there's a reason for that. We focus on Topeka and Shawnee County history, so everything you'll see today has some Topeka connection. Another type of trade card that was very popular was what was called a stock card. They were cheaper. They allowed a business to do their own stamping to customize it. Stock cards also would have a number on them and you could collect a whole set. Scrapbooking was popular. Trade cards were very colorful, and you think about living in the 1880s, your world in printed form is pretty much black and white. So these are a way to introduce very inexpensively color into your scrapbook. You would get these generally when you went into a store and bought something, you kind of picked them up. Children would collect them, bring them home, and show their parents. And you can see in these, this one's the most obvious here, the druggists, that this is a stock card. It has a number on it down here and a publisher name. Printed down below, it's stamped actually, and they haven't done a very good job of stamping it, is the name of the business and the location and what they're selling. Collecting these for scrapbooking, this one has a lot of color in it. It's very interesting, especially the bright pink. The bright pink they seem to use quite a bit because it was really striking and it was noticeable. Companies started doing more and more color and making it much more elaborate. This is advertising the Kansas Free Fair. This girl is a wheat girl, and so she's in this shock of wheat. She has bird shoes, and if we turn it over, this is actually advertising the 5th annual Kansas State Fair. Kermit's mandrake pills. You can see the mandrake plants up here. It's colorful, it's an interesting image, it catches your attention, and it might be something you'd want to put in a scrapbook. These cards here show very attractive young women advertising the product. Women were used a lot in advertising. It caught your attention if you're a man. If you're a woman, maybe this is an ideal of what you'd like to look like. Sewing machines were invented in 1844. By the end of the 19th century, there were more than 200 sewing machine companies, so in a very short amount of time, it became such a huge part of a household. Another thing to put the sewing machine in perspective is that before sewing machines were invented and you had to hand sew a man's shirt, it took approximately 14 hours. With a sewing machine, you could do that same job in a little over an hour, and so that really changed the way women lived. And so these cards we're going to look at now show women at leisure, children at leisure, doing fun things. They don't have to worry about working as children. That's what you would aspire for in your own life. Obviously, she has time for leisure now. She has a sewing machine that allows her to get her sewing done very quickly, very efficiently. She has a book that she's dropped on the floor. She's probably just fallen asleep. But again, she's an ideal woman. Look at her beautiful hair. And the way she's dressed definitely evokes middle class. She probably didn't have to work. She may have done some household duties, things she enjoyed like sewing, but she definitely wasn't responsible for all the cooking and cleaning and those kinds of things. Children were also a big element in trade cards, and children were probably the thing that was depicted the most, not even necessarily relating to what the card was advertising. And this is an idealized version of childhood. These children don't have to work. They have time to sit outside in the fresh air and read a book. And by having this thread, it would make your sewing go so much faster and your children could enjoy leisure time. Not a very elegant product, but the way that they've presented it, what woman wouldn't want this particular carpet sweeper? It doesn't actually show a person using. They kind of remove you from the thought that this is something that's drudgery and something that you're going to have to do but look how beautiful it is. This next one takes us outside the home, but still within domestic duties. Look at the birds and things you're going to attract with your beautiful lawn. This machine got a silver medal at the Paris Exposition. So obviously, if it's good enough for Paris, it's good enough for you. This next one we're going to look at is also an advertisement for a sewing machine, but it's an example of a different kind of card. The image on the card doesn't have anything to do with sewing. It's an image of the Brooklyn Bridge, which is an engineering marvel. Sewing machines were an engineering marvel, so maybe that's the connection. Maybe not. Maybe you hadn't ever been to Brooklyn, but this was an image of the Brooklyn Bridge. You could put that in your scrapbook and dream about someday being able to go to the big city. Another category of card that was very popular was advertising medicines. Until 1906, medicine wasn't regulated at all, so the people doing this advertising could make any claims they wanted and they didn't have to back it up with anything. You can barely see right here the name of the product. Dr. Thomas's Eclectric Oil makes all kinds of claims as to fixing any ailment, guaranteed, all those claims that can't be verified because at this point they didn't have to. But looking at this trade card with the beautiful woman, looking at the beautiful printing, that gives you confidence that what they're selling is going to work. Another category of image that was depicted on trade cards a lot were animals. The animals have no relation whatsoever to the product that they're selling. Adorable bunnies. We turn them over, and this is for boots and shoes. Bunnies look nice in a scrapbook. This is a nighttime scene, which we haven't seen in any of the other cards, so this is quite dramatic. It's advertising a house mover. I can't make a connection between the dog and the sewing machine. That doesn't look like a queen to me, that looks like a dog. These next few cards that we're going to look at take the trade card concept and add a bit to it. This one actually tells a story. The gentleman is very upset because his dinner is usually late, because his poor wife is over the wash tub trying to get the clothes washed. But if we go ahead and open the flap, now she has a clothes wringer. Home sweet home, dinner is ready on time, smile on the gentleman's face. Die cut to look like a wallet. You have your money in your wallet. You have reminders here to buy the soap. The implication may be that Piers is a little fancier than your normal soap, but you have the money to buy it, so why not indulge yourself in fancy soap. We have our interesting western scene here on the side, our advertising information here on the other side. If we flip it over, this card actually served as a blotter, and before you started writing you wanted to get the extra ink off the tip so you didn't leave a big blot. Probably, since this is from a bank thinking that you're going to be writing checks, they give you a blotter. With having the blotter on the back, that's an actual functional element to this card, and that gives you a reason to keep it. In the cards we've seen so far, we've seen images of animals, children, mothers with children, and they've all been very idealized representations. Middle class, all white, and that was the ideal at the time. We do have one card that represents African American stereotypes. The stereotype cards were meant as humorous cards. They were meant to contrast between the idealized white family and the black family, who was depicted as lazy, poor, ignorant. If we take a look at this card here, this is again our perfect mother, our perfect child. They have enough leisure time that she's just knitting. It doesn't look like she needs to finish this quickly in order to clothe her family. And we have the adorable little kitten over here, our domestic animal, who's very clean as well. Idealized Caucasian middle class family. Now we can contrast that with this card here, which is actually advertising sewing machines. You can see here he has sewing machines in his wagon. But we look at the depiction of this family and we have the stereotypes of African Americans. They live in a very basic house, it looks like. They're doing chores. She has to do the manual labor. This child doesn't have shoes on. And with this family here, the mother isn't dressed to be seen in public. She's dressed to do the work around the house. She's surrounded by her children, who are also probably expected to do the work around the house. These aren't folks that just get to sit around and knit all day and play with their kitten. The peddler, the person selling the sewing machines, he's presented as a rather ridiculous fellow. His clothes are baggy and aren't really fashionable for the time. An animal is depicted here, but as you can see, it's very mischievous and it's pulling his clothes off. Whereas the kitten in the other card is just too adorable for words and wouldn't harm a fly. Would never take one of those balls of yarn and run with it. In the 1880s, depictions of racial stereotypes in trade cards was very popular, and the imagery that would depict them on the cards would reflect this. While we only have this one card representing African American stereotypes, these types of cards were very popular and very numerous, and it wasn't just African Americans that were depicted on these. American Indians were depicted on cards as the noble savage, dignified, they lived on the land. Chinese stereotypes, however, were probably more brutal than the African American ones. This was at a time when Chinese people were basically used as laborers, and they were understood not to be able to be assimilated into American society. And so they were treated quite harshly, both in person and in imagery on these cards. These trade cards, like we have in our collection here, were very popular in the 1880s, but after that time, their popularity declined. And there are several reasons for that. One of them is that mailing costs went down, so magazines started having more advertising. Postcards became more popular in the 1890s and took the place of trade cards in a lot of places. But postcards also were replaced by about the 1920s with magazine advertising, and so trade cards and postcards were really obsolete by that time. Our trade card collection is really special because it's a Topeka history time capsule. We have businesses that no longer exist. We have imagery that was important at the time, so that gives an idea of what was popular, what was in the mainstream. The trade cards also give us a glimpse into printing practices at the time. It also gives us an idea of what people were collecting. The way we treat people has changed, and the social and cultural images depicted in these cards really speak to that, give you an understanding of what the values were at the time and how the white middle class perfect family was really the ideal that was presented consistently through all these cards.